everyone, and welcome to Beauty in the Biz, where we talk about the business and marketing side of plastic surgery. I'm your host, Catherine Maley, author of Your Aesthetic Practice, What Your Patients Are Saying, as well as consultant to plastic surgeons to get them more patients and more profits. Now, today's episode is about growing, scaling, and/or exiting your practice by bringing on a partner or an associate, because a popular question I get from all over the United States is, Catherine, do you know a surgeon who would be interested in joining my practice? Or do you know of anyone or a group interested in buying me out? If it were only that simple. So, to answer these questions and more, I invited an expert in surgeon recruiting and succession planning who knows the ins and outs and the pros and cons of a practice that is transitioning to buy, sell, or add to. That expert is Steve Look of Paradigm Search Group in Dallas. Now, Steve is a leader in physician recruiting industry with more than 20 years of experience in recruiting, leadership, and management. He's also an active member of the NAPR, which I'm guessing is the National Association of Physician Recruitment. Steve, welcome to Beauty in the Biz podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's just start out by how in the world did you get into this? And tell us what's going on in the world of like plastic surgeons, the demand for transitioning a practice. What's been happening in that world?
Sure. Yeah. In terms of my entrance into it, almost 25 years now, started essentially out of college with a degree in finance and got into physician recruitment and have been in it ever since. And our specialization now is within the plastic surgery space because while for many years we recruited all specialties, we identified a real gap in service for plastic surgery. It's obviously a small corner of the market, less than 1% of the physician population overall. And as a result of that, not a lot of resources available when it comes to recruitment. So we identified that 20 plus years in the business too. What I really enjoy the most and find most rewarding is we're working directly with owners and ownership groups on their goals. And in plastic surgery, that's still the majority of the market. So that's kind of how we fell into this space. And in terms of the physician market overall, plastic surgery, like most specialties, you have an aging population of physicians, and in this case, plastic surgeons. Over half of the plastic surgeons operating in the country right now are over the age of 55. So we have a lot of surgeons who are beginning to age out. Or who are mature in practice and they're thinking about the next stage, the next step, and whether that be to recruit somebody, to potentially look at an acquisition, or to just ultimately close the practice, which I always say I've yet to meet a surgeon who, when the time comes, is excited about the prospects of just closing the doors. So hopefully it's one of the other two options.
Actually, I interviewed somebody recently and I said, so what's your exit strategy? And he said, I'm just going to close up shop. And I said, are you sure? Because when you put that much time and effort into something, that's your baby. And in his head right now, he's very active and has no vision of leaving soon. But I just think you want to get something out of all your effort there and leave with something, you know?
Yeah, when the time comes, what we generally find is that it's not always about a financial windfall that they're seeking, but there's continuity of care for patients. There's also continuity of employment for their staff. There's people who've been with them for oftentimes decades, and they're thinking about them, their future, and then of course the legacy of the practice that they've built. So yeah, what we generally see is that when that time comes, it is bittersweet if the option is just to close the door. It's not as much of a simple relief. There's other factors that begin to weigh in as it gets closer.
That's a good point about the staff. You don't want to leave them hanging if they took care of you all those years.
Yeah,
By the way,
absolutely.
are more practices, in your experience, are more practices looking to sell or looking to buy?
In terms of the demographic amongst the aging population of plastic surgeons, most of those practices are still solo or small physician practices. So in that case, I think you have more people who are interested in exiting, again, whether that be a sale or recruiting a successor. But more of that aging population is looking to exit in some form or fashion.
And one way to do that is to bring on an associate. I've been around for 24 years. All of us have been around for a while. So yeah,
Yeah.
like you really do start changing your vision and your priorities, and you're trying to figure out like what is my exit strategy. But a lot of the surgeons now who are getting older, they never wanted to work with somebody else, which is why they're solo practices. So now they've got to bring an associate on board, or that's a typical thing to do. What are the seasoned surgeons looking for in a younger surgeon, or what are they looking for? Should it be a younger surgeon? Should it be another surgeon that's not like too young where they have to start from scratch with them? Any tips there?
Yeah, I think that there are pluses and minuses to both. Obviously, the idea of somebody who's in practice, I commonly will have a client say, if you can find somebody who's been out, 10 years or more, and they can kind of step in and it'll be more of a seamless transition, which can be the case. Although those individuals are fewer and harder to find, who are actually out there looking for that. But that can be a good candidate if it's the right person. Conversely, though, that younger candidate who's coming out of training, who's ambitious and full of vigor and really has a vision for having their own practice, but doesn't want to hang a shingle and start from scratch like a lot of your and my clients did, at the beginning. And that can also be a really good candidate as well. So my counsel to our clients is to let's look at each individual on a case by case basis. There are pluses and minuses to experience versus newer, and really just try to find that right overall fit. And I've seen it happen both ways.
So have I. I have to tell you, I have not seen really good partnerships that have been long lasting and drama free. For lots of reasons. But when somebody's been out, like let's say that what you said, the surgeon wants somebody who's been out 10 years. If you've been out 10 years, I would hope you have a nice established practice that would make it pretty impossible for you to just close up shop and go to somebody else's practice, unless logistically you're near each other. And then it becomes a beautiful asset because now it's a merger rather than, you know, somebody taking over everything and starting over. But do you find that like how many? It seems like that would be really difficult to find somebody who's been around 10 years. However, then you take somebody who's brand new at this, brand new, like straight out of fellowship. And I can't even imagine how, like, do you I know you work with the fellows or the, residents coming out. How do you go about telling them this is the kind of practice you're looking for, or how do you even begin that kind of search?
Yeah, it is a unique fit. And I often talk to my clients about the fact that fortunately, the landscape in plastic surgery, it still consists primarily of small private groups, right? So when these residents begin to rotate out in, particularly in the aesthetic space, right? Generally, that rotation is going to be with a solo practice physician out in the community, or maybe a small group of 1 to 2 physicians, maybe 3. So they are exposed to that type of a practice environment. And that is, at this point, it is fairly unique to plastics. Other surgical subspecialties have largely consolidated, right? So you just don't see as many independent operators. In the plastic world, you still do. And so a result of that is a lot of your young, ambitious surgeons who have a vision of having their own practice, they're modeling what they've seen out in the market. And as a result of that, they're still interested in having their own practice. That's becoming more and more rare in the greater physician population, right? Even within the surgical subspecialties. In plastic, that's still the norm. So there are still those young candidates who want that. And so part of it is finding those who want that, have an entrepreneurial spirit. And then secondly is helping to create a potential pathway that makes it realistic for them, right? And fortunately, again, in our little niche in plastics, we still see that regularly, so we're able to find those. In terms of the 10-year or experienced physician, again, that can be a great fit as well. It is more difficult than what you might think going into it, though, because a lot of times, in addition to what you mentioned, where they may already be established somewhere, they're also 10 years into their lives, right? So they have a standard of living that they have, escalated up to, like we all do, right? So 10 years in, the financial needs are probably higher for that person. And when we talk about a succession plan, generally physician who's looking to exit is not in a position or has an appetite for a massive financial guarantee and offering and so forth. So the experienced surgeon, even if they want to do it, it can be difficult financially for them to make it a reality, where the younger candidates sometimes can obviously are more flexible as they're just getting started. And that can also kind of tip the balance of who's going to be the right fit for us.
It's just such a challenge because you want the younger surgeon to have that drive and hustle to grow his part of the practice. But then you also want him to settle down, learn from the older surgeon who's been around a long time. And I think that's where the egos clash
You're
because
exactly
the
right.
the very thing you're looking for is the very thing that, the older surgeon, the very thing you're looking for is the very thing that's going to cause you trouble because that younger surgeon's going to be anxious. They don't want to do recon. They don't want to do calls when you're on call. They don't want to
Yeah.
do that. They don't want to do insurance. They want to go straight to cosmetic. And I just watch that over and over, and I think, boy, I sure hope everyone's clear about what the expectations are on both sides, you know?
Agree 100%. I think it's the right balance of somebody who has an entrepreneurial drive and zest and is ambitious, but is also not so much so that they really are going to have a problem assimilating into somebody else's practice. So I agree with you 100%. Ego and balancing that is very important. And you touched on something that to me is really key to the whole process, and that's setting expectations. As we talk about what constitutes success, I think expectations and open communication on that are absolutely critical. And a lot of times that's what's missing as you enter into a relationship.
And it's also like how you set that up. So is it a dictatorship? Is it a partnership? Is it a we'll talk about it down the road? I think that also starts usually about year two, I will tell you. Usually about year two, the younger surgeon is saying to himself, I got this. I know how to do this. I'm good. Now, where's the buy-in part that I don't have to invest in? I just want a piece of the action kind of thing. You know, I think that comes up a lot. I don't know if you want to talk about that now or later, but
Yeah, absolutely. And I know what we commonly hear on that point is, gosh, I joined this practice and it was the third option you mentioned. It was, we'll talk about that down the line. Let's just get started. And now here we are. We're 2, 3, 4 years in. They've ramped up to whatever degree they're feeling like they're deserving of this partnership or this, and then we come to the table for the first time and really start to talk about that in detail. That's a recipe for disaster, right? Generally, the expectations by the incumbent are much higher than what the junior had in mind. They're blown away by, a number, or there's a hesitancy from the senior to embrace that idea. Although they said they were open to it, they still don't feel ready. And so one of the things that we encourage strongly is we don't have to have every detail day one, but let's have a clear path on a timeline, and let's try to get some detail around that so we're not just pushing the can down the road until that time comes. Because I agree with you, that generally does not end well.
well, I have seen quite a few times where the surgeon said, it's a 5-year plan. I'm out in 5 years. Sure enough, here's the 5 years, and they want another 5 years.
Huh.
And and the younger surgeon has been banking on this, so you can't change the rules down the road. By the way, if you I recommend just make them associate for now. Don't get all legal yet, just a contractor or an associate. Do you have any tips for that? Like how to bring somebody on board without signing your life away, but having that honeymoon period where you can first figure out, are you a good fit or not?
Yeah, 100%. We advocate the same. We advocate that the initial term is going to be an employment term as an associate.
Mhm.
For a new graduate, a resident, or a fellow, the standard that we generally employ would be a 3-year initial term. So a 3-year associateship with a well-defined compensation plan. Generally, it's going to include some guaranteed base compensation as well as a bonus structure. If it's the in practice physician that we talked about, 5 years out, 10 years out, then maybe that associateship goes down to 2 years, where for the first 2 years. So we accelerated a little bit, minimum of 1 year if it was a unique situation, maybe the in-market situation that you mentioned, and we said, hey, we're going to really accelerate this. But most commonly, 2 to 3 year initial term as an associate based on experience, with the understanding that at the end of that term, then there will be eligibility for partnership, shareholdership, whatever is being envisioned at that time. So to your point, we're not getting married day one, but let's get started with the understanding that both of our intent is at the end of the term to then move into some type of a partnership arrangement. And the other thing I would touch on briefly regarding partnership or ownership equity, that doesn't mean that at the first day of the third year you're giving up half of your practice, right? It does not have to mean that at all. A partnership, an equity structure can mean many different things. It can mean 1% ownership. It can be up to 5%, 10%. A lot of it is based on how aggressively the incumbent wants to transition out. And so I think one of the keys there is that there's understandable fear by the incumbent that, well, hey, wait a minute, I've spent 25, 30 years building this. I'm not just going to give half away. That's not necessarily what it means at all, but it does mean that at the end of the associate term, that they're going to have an opportunity for some kind of ownership position or partnership in whatever portions of the practice the incumbent is interested in opening up to that.
I also, regarding the associate agreement, those numbers have changed a lot throughout the years. Typically, and I know it varies through state to state. However, typically you would give them a salary of, let's say, $200K. And that would include also their membership fees and their insurance, and maybe a couple of other things. Since then, that has grown tremendously. I feel like the associates in today's world are way more, I shouldn't say entitled, but they are expecting a lot more, a cushy situation. Can you address that at all?
Yeah, very, very true. And certainly something that a common refrain from my clients is that, oh my gosh, the entitlement, they want so much. This is not how I started. I was completely on my own and, didn't make any real money for many, many years. They want it handed to them. So that dynamic, I always share with my clients, is definitely in play when we come to recruitment. There is going to be some feeling of, my gosh, this is a lot richer than what I expected. So part of the reason that it's important to put something together that's competitive is that you are competing with employed opportunities from larger organizations, whether that be a hospital or a larger group. And those employment offerings, the compensation is higher. So generally, my counsel is, what we're trying to do, we're not going to try to match what a hospital is going to pay somebody coming in. That's going to be significantly higher. But we want something that's going to be viewed favorably, competitively, and that's going to allow them to make a transition, right? The average resident or fellow is probably in their mid to late 30s. Many of them do have a young family. So there are financial realities that they want to address, right? Not to mention loan debt and those sorts of things. So, I think some type of financial commitment is important. And I would agree with you, generally would include some kind of a guaranteed base or floor, along with the benefits associated with an employment structure. We saw in the post-COVID boom years, we saw those numbers really go up. In as things have kind of come, I think, back down to reality and a little bit more of a sustainable level, we've seen the compensation offerings ebb back a little bit. And obviously there's a range based on the location and the geographics. I would tell you anywhere from probably 250 up into the 400 range in terms of a first year guarantee would be most common, with benefits, your basic benefits, and then some kind of a bonus structure that hopefully gets them motivated to ramp up and increase their production.
Another thing that becomes a big decision-making point is patient attraction. Who's in charge of marketing this new surgeon? So the new surgeon comes on board typically and says, okay, I'm here, we're the patients. And in the other, before it was about you, what do they say? You kill what you eat or eat what you kill.
Yeah.
whatever that saying is. That's a terrible
Yeah,
saying.
you
But
can scale. Yeah.
they would go out, they would go drum up their own business, and now they expect the practice typically to do all the marketing because everyone's looking for predictable revenues, which of course we all want that, but nothing's predictable like it used to be. It's just too competitive now, and the patients really, you have to hang on to them. You have to find them, attract them, and then hang on to them to really build a base of like a word of mouth base. And what I like to do is at least use the more mature surgeon and the younger surgeon for the consumer. I like to go like it's a yes or yes decision. We have choice one, which is the more seasoned surgeon. He's more expensive and he's not as available. Or we have another, if there's any resistance to that, we have another option for you. So I like to do that. But frankly, who should be in charge of the marketing or the patient attraction or filling up that new surgeon's surgical schedule?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and one of the most important questions as you look at the success of the endeavor, because the common refrain that we get either from a candidate who's calling because they're looking for another job, or from a client or prospective client who's looking to recruit, is that for the young candidate, so well, I joined somewhere, but their position, if it didn't work, probably would be I wasn't supported. They didn't market me, they didn't help promote me, and so I didn't ramp up. The position of the employer would probably be they didn't go do what I did. They didn't go make the connections and do the things that I did to build this practice. They just sat in their office and thought the patients were going to come, right? So that's usually the he said, she said. I think the truth is probably commonly somewhere in the middle. And to answer your question, I would say that it should be a joint effort that is collaborative and that is well communicated up front, that the practice has a plan for promoting this individual. What you mentioned in terms of introducing them as either more available and or at a lower cost, I think is a great way to do it. But then also for the physician coming in, they should have some ideas about what they're going to do. And there should be a lot of communication from both parties about, okay, how are we going to do this? And again, getting back to the communication piece, I think if that isn't well planned and executed, it's a recipe for disappointment.
When you're having that discussion, I would also include social media. Most of the younger people, I shouldn't say most, it seems like the younger people have embraced social media more so than the others, but that's not true either. I know plenty of seasoned surgeons who are all over social media because that's where the eyes went, and they're adaptable. They're like, okay, I have to be on there. Oh, okay. But I would make sure to set that expectation that that new surgeon has got to make videos. And like I just did this a couple weeks ago. There's a new surgeon, and I said, okay, here's what you're gonna do. Go buy a bunch of balloons. And we had like scenarios. Like she walked through the door with all these balloons. She held up a sign first day, she did some really fun things, and then she also did some FAQs for typical procedures she's gonna be doing. Like she's got to help herself, you know, she has to help the practice help her, kind of thing. So I would just be so clear about you're not going to sit around. You're going to hustle. We've got to get you up and busy, but we can't do it alone.
100%. And I think that for those younger surgeons who do have that interest in social, for the practice to support it and say, yes, we've got your back on this. We're going to support this. Let's help you with that. Because there are those more mature practices that, still will say, oh, that stuff doesn't work. That's not how I did it. And so they're not really embracing what the new surgeon is coming in with. And once again, that's a recipe for disappointment. So I agree. I think if they're coming with new ideas, supporting them and it being collaborative is huge. I just was meeting with a client and a young surgeon that we were able to put together. So we had dinner and just, kind of to celebrate and catch up. And he said, I'm feeling very supported by the practice. I talked to the practice manager and she said, our staff is energized by his presence. And I said, this is great to hear because it's not always the case, right? They're not always embraced by the staff. So the energy sometimes is not there. But if everybody is in the same boat, so to speak, it can work and it does work. But I agree with you. I think it takes a fully supported effort from both parties.
It's so funny you should say that. The new physician with the balloons, she said, "I feel so supported here. We are so in sync with growing this together. The other surgeons completely on board, willing to invest in different ideas. And he's not a big marketer, but I've given him a lot of ideas to come on. We've got to get her off the ground here. And the team's on board. The staff looks at it as, oh dear God, here's some more work for me. Now I'm
Exactly.
confused. I
Yep.
don't know how am I supposed to recommend? Am I supposed to recommend the other doctor or the younger doctor?
Uh-huh.
So yeah, but that's where you call somebody like me in. Let me say, you know what? Now we changed the phone script. Now we've changed some of the processes. It's not that big of a deal. We'll be more structured now because there's more complexity to it. But it doesn't need to be difficult. But let's talk about the cultural fit. How important is cultural fit when you're trying to add a new element to your practice? And how do you do that? How do you find
Well,
out it?
I think it's huge, and I think that situation you just described, they're going to have success. That's a recipe for a successful, growth. And so, can this be done? Yes, we do see success stories like that one. But I do think cultural fit is really important. And I think at times, when it comes to two surgeons interacting, there's less of a search for a cultural fit and more of a unwritten understanding of, okay, you're going to come in and do a good job, and I'm going to do my thing, and we're just going to go with this. And so that cultural fit piece sometimes is missing there. Perhaps the training pedigree is overweighed. Their CV is brilliant, and clearly they're a very well trained individual. And perhaps that is overvalued versus, do we get along? Do they have the right personality for an aesthetic environment, right? Which is a unique skill set in itself. And so I think really honing in on, do we feel like this individual has the right personality for this practice environment? Are they going to engage with patients? How do they interact with our staff? Are they collaborative? Is the energy, what's the vibe? Is it positive when they're here? What was the staff's feedback? And I think those are things that can help kind of cue in, because the staff, they're going to get a good feel for the individual that sometimes the surgeon themselves may not be as keyed into. So I think involving the staff, really identifying those social dynamics and not just focusing on the training pedigree is valuable in that, finding that cultural piece. And it's super important without question.
Out of curiosity, how long do you think it takes until you have a good cultural fit, or this is a train wreck in the makings?
That's a great question. I think, and I'm sure you've seen many examples over the years. I think if it's the train wreck piece, pretty fast. I think that comes to light pretty quickly. And I think the cultural fit does as well. Although I would encourage, a practice to be patient. If maybe they're coming on a little more slowly than what everybody would expect, but overall everybody still feels positively about that, be a little bit patient. But the train wreck scenario, generally, in my experience, it's known pretty quickly. Unfortunately, I think it is acted on probably more slowly than it should be. So it kind of goes, because a lot of the clients that we work with, before they engage our services, they've already had a train wreck experience. So when they come to us, they say, look, we tried this once, maybe multiple times, and it did not work. And so that's common for there to be a misfire. And a lot of times what I'll hear on the train wreck standpoint is, we knew early on, and I should have acted sooner. I waited. They were here 2 years, and it really set us back. And there was a financial burden. And so I'm really leery about trying it again, because I don't want to get burned again. So, I would say if you're down the train wreck scenario, I would encourage swift action to try to intervene, because usually your gut will tell you if we're way off on this whole thing.
And act a whole lot sooner than you did, because that 2 years didn't need to be that. It could have
Oh,
been 6 months. And by the way, I think you should listen to your staff. The staff can see it with a much different perspective than the surgeon can, because the surgeon has so much vested in it. The older surgeon, he needs this to work, so he'll ignore quite a bit. The staff will, if you have a good relationship with your staff, they should be able to go to you and say, just so you know, this is what he's saying behind your back, or this is what we're hearing, and I don't think that's what you want. And then deal with it. Gosh, surgeons do not want to deal with it, but you can deal with it now when it's small, or deal with it when it's a huge problem.
I agree. I couldn't agree more, 100%. And I think that what sometimes is missing in that scenario is, and I agree with you, nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to have those difficult managerial conversations. It's exhausting, right? Especially a surgeon who's in the OR all day, managing a practice. But setting those expectations as you do with the rest of your staff, or the staff does with their people that they report to, doing that management stuff, having those follow-ups, having those discussions, and doing it early is really valuable to keep it from going too long and getting too far off the rails.
At this point, I'm thinking, you know how everyone is a life coach now, or a business coach? There are a lot of coaches out there.
Mhm.
But if you could find a good one that works for both personalities, I think have a business coach on the side who could be that third party, who can meet with you regularly, both of you regularly, and keep it friendly and keep it professional, and air out issues that are brewing now, rather than later, because it all comes out eventually, so you can have that discussion now or later, but you're going to have it eventually. Yeah.
I agree. It's a marriage. It
Yeah,
really
it sure
is.
is.
And so,
Yeah.
having some counseling there to keep things on track, I think is valuable. And as you mentioned, having a consultant like yourself who can help set things up at the beginning on how's the staff going to introduce this individual, what are we going to do? All of that to me is invaluable
Mhm.
to get things off on the right track.
So let's talk about the valuation of a plastic surgery practice, because the valuation differs on who's evaluating it or valuing it. So any tips on how much is a practice worth?
Yeah, this has obviously been a hot topic
Yeah.
over the last couple of years,
Yep.
as we've seen an influx of PE into the aesthetic plastic space, and so we've seen some wild swings, and a lot of my clients, and I'm sure yours, have heard about huge evaluations and giant multipliers, and these windfalls that are happening. And for some practices, that certainly has happened. Um, for others, it is not the paradise that was described as they explore it further. And so each situation is different. For some practices, it might make sense. For others, it does not. And as a result of how different the practices are, the valuations can swing wildly. Um, Generally speaking, the valuation most commonly is going to be a function of the revenue that the practice is generating. And then, of course, the bottom line, the net profit, and will be some kind of evaluation based on that, as well as the assets of the practice. If they have their own surgery center, if they own the building, all of those things can affect valuation, of course. Um, what we've learned in terms of getting some of these max valuations that a lot of folks have heard about is generally there are a few ingredients that these suitors are looking for, and generally that would include more than one surgeon in the practice. If it's a solo practice, the PE groups and suitors have a high key man risk there. That if this individual gets hit by a bus tomorrow, there's the value of the practice is essentially gone. So if it's a solo practice without a real estate assets and or a surgery center asset, the valuation is not going to meet what they've probably heard out in the market, right? That there's going to be this windfall. Those ingredients just aren't there. Normally, what they're looking for a max valuation is going to be at least two full-time practicing surgeons in a major market with a surgery center, ideally with spa revenue that's about equal to surgical revenue. Those would be kind of your check to get the big, bright valuation that we've heard about in the market. For a lot of our clients, those boxes are not checked, so the valuation is much lower. And a lot of times our clients will come to us and say, well, we explored that. And what we've been told is that, we're not a candidate for an amount of money that would be worth going down that road. So the windfall is not there. And I understand that as the owner, right? However, I also don't like the idea of just closing this and getting, no value. And again, the staff and the patients and the legacy. So a lot of times what we're able to do is say, let's take a hard look at what this might be worth or how we could make this attractive to a successor. And that would allow for some capital exchange along with the succession, the legacy, the continuation of employment for staff. And so it becomes a win-win. But unfortunately, the windfall aspect of that generally is not reality for a lot of the practices.
And I don't think the multipliers are anything near what they were 2 years ago. We were hearing such crazy numbers. And I would go to the conferences, and I mean, it was a hot topic. And some of the first, it's always this way. The first adapters make all the money,
Uh,
and then something happens, like people get more educated, or who knows what. But another thing that they've done is with the solo practices, a lot of them are still solo, but they grabbed not a VC guy, more like just a money guy or a money group, because nobody knows where to put their money anymore. Do you put it in stocks or real estate or what? So they get somebody who has some, I guess it's VC money, or I don't know what you want to call it, and they want to just roll them over. They want to package them up and roll over these solo. And in the meantime, the surgeons are supposed to be gaining profits from the economies of scale. But then someone's got to figure out how to manage all of that. When you have 3 practices in 3 different states and you're trying to roll them up into one, I just think that sounds so challenging. But have you heard that work?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. We've seen all kinds of different,
Yeah.
scenarios and strategies and so forth. And I think we're starting to see now, 2, 3, 4 years into it, kind of some of the whiplash where it hasn't worked as expected, right? And so those economies of scale maybe weren't realized, and or the headache factor for somebody who's been independent and done it their way for many, many years is struggling, right, to assimilate, and it's not, maybe creating the happiness that they thought that it would. So, each situation is different. There's been some that have been great, but I'm with you. I think it's difficult to do, and I think that uh, with the valuation piece, I agree 100%. I've had multiple clients over the last year who have kind of taken it out to the market, have explored, and have come back and said, "Hey, that wasn't what it was cracked up to be, and that's not worth it for me because by the let's say it's X multiple or X amount." You say, well, gosh, I'm currently earning that based on just the performance of my practice. That's maybe 2 to 3 years of income after by the time you take tax out. So why wouldn't I just work 2 or 3 more years, stay independent, maintain control, and keep that money? That's not that compelling for me to do, which is understandable. So, why don't we toggle towards recruiting a successor into this,
Mhm.
and going that route? So we definitely have seen that multiple times, and I think it's a decision that is unique to each individual, to each practice, and the dynamics. But
Mhm.
yes, I think that a lot of times, and increasingly so right now, we're seeing where it's just not worth it for that solo operator. It's just not compelling enough when you really drill it down and look at the net outcome of it.
Well, you lose a lot of control over your baby, and I think that's a huge hurdle. Another one is what has changed a lot is just a couple years ago, the earnout, let's just say the deal structure, you only needed to stay 1 or 2 years, and if you had a really good non-surgical component and they had predictable revenues, they almost wanted that more than your surgical side. So you could walk away. Now you have to stay. They need you to stay for 3, 5, 10 years. And that was new because I thought, oh dear, because a practice is a money-making machine, if you think about it, it's a money-making machine for somebody. So it's either for the solo practitioner or for that VC investment company that thinks they can even make it more so. But gosh, what would you say is the most common deal structure in today's world? Is there such a thing? How long do they need to stay?
I think in a perfect world, my counsel would be that, minimum 3 to 5 years would be the right amount of time to consider to begin really getting serious about a transition. We will receive calls from a surgeon. I received a call, I remember late last year, from a surgeon who said, "Hey, I need help. I really want to." And I said, "Well, tell me about what's going on." And he said, "Well, my lease is up in 6 months, and I said, it's too late. We can't help, unfortunately."
How long should they be planning for this? This happens all the time. They don't allow enough time to transition.
That's correct. I think sooner is better.
Mm.
3 to 5 years is what is going to be ideal from the incoming candidate's perspective, because the candidate coming in, either experienced or in training, they don't want to feel like, hey, the day I get there, they're just handing me the keys and taking off. They know that they need that individual to stay there to support them, even if it's not surgically, certainly from a business aspect, right? So that candidate is going to want to hear, hey, I plan to be here for, 2 to 3 years from the time you get here up to 5, and we'll transition it. So ideally, you would want to be there 3 to 5 years from the time that we get really serious about a succession plan. Okay. And with that, we generally counsel our clients to expect a year likely before this candidate is there, boots on the ground, right? Because whether they're in training and they're finishing, or they're in practice, they still have to move. They probably have kids in school. So expect a year before they get there. So if it's going to be a year before they get there, and then you want to be there 2 to 3 more years, you can see where it easily elongates the timeline. So I'm with you. Sooner is better because it doesn't happen overnight. And ideally, they're going to want you involved for a period of time during that transition. The other component that is beneficial to having more time is that it also gives the incumbent more opportunity to extract capital from the incoming surgeon, meaning the longer that they're working, the more they're ramped up, the more they can ultimately exchange capital for the practice in terms of the buyout.
Mhm.
If it's just 1 year, that's difficult. They won't really be making a whole lot of money in the first year, right? It's really year 2, year 3 that they'll really begin to traction. And if it's a graduated buyout type of a situation, which is what we generally encourage, then more time gives more runway for the incoming surgeon to be able to buy out the surgeon who's on their way out. If we're compressing it down, it puts more pressure on everybody.
So, when it comes to an associate who's going to join a practice that is then involved in a PE discussion, some of those have unraveled because the associate is looking at this like, where do I fit into this? Like, what's going on here? Am I going to get screwed? So, do you have any thoughts about that? Because I don't know if you can do both at the same time. Try to sell this practice while you're bringing an associate on board.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I've had many clients who have attempted to do so, or they have
Hmm.
contracted with us at the time where they said, "Hey, look, I want to do this and I want to do that," and we're very upfront with them, saying that that can be an obstacle to recruitment. It can be overcome, but it really has to be messaged appropriately, because, to your point, the incoming physician is saying, "Well, how's this good for me?
Yeah.
If he's going to sell, and what do I get? And I'm going to miss the boat. The money's gone." And the perception amongst younger physicians, in particular in the market, is still negative as it relates to
Mm.
non-physician ownership, right? They're going to work you like a dog. You're not going to get, so there's a negative perception. So that can be a real challenge. The best case scenario for a practice owner is to recruit the second surgeon in, get them established, and then take it to market. Okay, because number one, you're going to get a higher valuation because there's less key man risk. The revenue of the practice should be much, much higher, and you'll get a better valuation. So a lot of times the answer is recruit in an associate now, and then downstream you can revisit the liquidation event. If it's already happened it's more difficult to recruit the incoming surgeon. It can be done. We do it regularly, but the most attractive uh, offering for a young, the position we described, entrepreneurial zest, wants to have their own practice. The most attractive offering that we could put out there would be, here's a well-established practice that you are going to become a partner in, and then ultimately downstream have an opportunity for potentially, a liquidity event or be part of that transaction. That would be the most attractive.
This whole second bite of the apple thing, um, I don't know. I personally, I have seen my recommendation to surgeons is get as much upfront as humanly possible because there are an awful lot of ifs down the road. A lot has to work out to get that second piece that you are waiting for. Have you seen it? Have you seen the second bite work well, or it used to and now it doesn't, or is it just how do you even make this decision? Like, well, let me ask it this way: what makes it fail?
Well, ultimately there are factors that are out of your control,
Yeah.
right? I mean, obviously, your job in that scenario is to make and keep your practice producing at a high level so that your unit of the 5 or 10 or 20 units is doing well, but you really can't control what's going on the others. So you do give up that control aspect. And I think to answer your question on the second bite, I think it's still early in a lot of these endeavors because they've just happened over the last 18, 24 months, 12 months. And so that's still TBD. We don't know, but and certainly it can work. There's a formula that's happened in other physician markets. We've seen it in other specialties. So it definitely can work, but I agree with you. It's unknown. And there are factors that will be completely out of your control. So, I would agree with you. I would say as you evaluate that, make sure that the initial amount that you are satisfied with that amount on its own. And that if that's the last dollar you ever got, that would be enough to make it worth it because that second bite is compelling and hopefully meaningful, but it's unknown, not guaranteed, and will not completely be within your control. So I agree with you on that 100%.
So, what about must have clauses in a partnership agreement? Because most of this happens, number one, make sure you have an attorney look at all this paperwork. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When it comes time to paper up the legal, we always bring in, a legal team to make sure that all I's are dotted and T's are crossed 100%.
And who specialize in this kind of transition, right?
Yes. Yeah. We work closely with Vertidato that represents a
Of
lot of
course. Yeah,
practices
yeah.
in this space. And so
Yeah.
usually we'll work together on the final creation of the legal document.
Oh, that's a great partnership. Good for you. So is there anything in particular that the doctor should be looking for in that agreement?
Yeah. I think that, one of the keys is that, particularly for the associateship, right? That the compensation model is very clearly laid out. We when we work with our clients on defining that, we want to make it as clear as possible so that there's not a lot of confusion from the incoming surgeon about how they're going to get paid and what constitutes earning a bonus and so forth. So it should be clear. They should understand it, or if they don't, then let's go back through it and make sure because again, one of those recipes for disappointment is I don't understand why I'm not making more money. The bonus is not clear to me. It seems like the target keeps moving. And so what we advocate as the employers, make it very simple, usually centered around the surgeon fee, which is clearest and most controllable by the surgeon, the incoming candidate. And let's set it there and let's try to pay in terms of the bonus. Let's try to pay it at as frequently as is possible for the accounting practices of the practice. If you can do it monthly, pay it monthly or quarterly. We don't advocate a year long, an annual, because tends to be a recipe for a lot of expectation and then it's less than they thought and they're disappointed. They feel like maybe something, went awry. So I think clarity on the comp is really important. Um, we're obviously in an interesting time as it relates to the restrictive covenants with the FTC ruling that has come down and said, okay, those are banned. We know that's not final. It's going to be challenged by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, so it's going to be tied up in court. So We don't know the outcome of that, but the terms of the restrictive covenant are obviously and commonly something that are scrutinized. The other one that is coming up more and more often that you probably have more experience than I do on, but is the ownership of the social media, the before and afters and the pictures, and how that works. And I think that's another big one that is getting increasingly scrutiny as we go through the process.
For sure. I always tell the physicians, I would recommend if somebody's working under you, all of the photos go under social media, under the practice, and the watermark is the practices. And all of that, it's the practices at that point. But then you have to have all that in writing. If you're okay if they take their before and afters, because everyone wants their own before and after photos, they want to take them with. Half
They
the
do.
surgeons have worked at hospitals and they're literally like sneaking them out of there,
Yeah,
because because that's a physician's reputation. That's everything they have. It's their social proof. So you just have to figure all this out way ahead of time and get it in writing. That's what I would say.
I agree.
One last thing though about this, where does staff fit into this? Because there has to be a way the staff gets, I don't, the bet. I had a client recently. His partner decided to go back to the hospital, and he just made this huge announcement to the whole staff. Oh, he'll be leaving the practice, and we're just going to do cosmetic now. And I thought, whoa, 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 whoa. So I hurried up. I said, please call the staff. Everyone call the staff personally and say, you know what, you're fine. There's no problem with their job. We're just going to rearrange things. But immediately, boy, talk about razzing the staff. Like,
Oh,
two people quit immediately. Like, there's nothing like uncertainty to get a staff heading for the door. So, any tips on staff retention?
yeah, I agree 100%. I think that, I've had situations in the past where somebody said, well, I'd like you to come. We'll do an on-site consult. So I'd like you to come in. Let's get you an after hours so the staff doesn't see you. And it's like, whoa, 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 wait, time out. What communication about this project with the staff is the first thing that needs to happen, And I think at times it can be a little counterintuitive because the surgeon owner will think, well, if I tell the staff I'm, planning to retire or I'm recruiting to replace myself, they're going to freak out, right? So
Mhm.
I don't want to tell them. But I think in reality, what we more often see is if you meet with the staff proactively and say, hey, we have a plan. I'm not going to work forever, right? And they know that,
You know
right? The
that.
staff,
Yeah.
I mean, they see them every day. So today, I'm not going to work forever. You guys know that. However, here's my plan, and we're going to recruit somebody to keep. Normally, the staff is relieved
Mhm.
and they're energized by it. So I think early communication on what's going on is key, and then including the staff in the process, I think, is very important for the reasons we discussed earlier. So I think having them involved in the interview process, getting their feedback, giving them time to interact with the individual one-on-one so that you're not just making the decision as the surgeon, but your team can say, hey, we really like them, or gosh, we've got some concerns. I think it's critical to the success of it because the staff buy-in, as you mentioned, on helping this person ramp up is going to be as impactful as any other component. And if they're not on board and they don't feel like they were included, and to your point, they just view it as, oh, it's more work and I don't want to have anything to do with this individual. I'm loyal to, Dr. X and I don't want anything to do with Dr. Y. It's not going to work. So I think that's a huge part of success in the endeavor. And I think that communication about it early on actually will be helpful and not harmful to your staff.
Well, I think the uncertainty will just crush you otherwise. And I always say, in our industry, plastic surgery, it's fun medicine, and your staff can make or break your success. So treat them with respect, and treat them like intelligent people, and get the right staff on board too. If you have that kind of staff that would bolt at the first sign of trouble, then maybe it's not the right staff for you, but you need a good support system. Do you just have one good case scenario where all of this worked out beautifully? You brought in the associate, they all loved each other, the staff. It was just a kumbaya practice.
I do. It's funny. I was going to put a post out with a picture because just to say that, yes, these happy endings, they do happen. So this can be successfully done. The one you referenced earlier sounds like that's one that they're on their way to success. Everybody's excited. They're meshing. That's going to work. That's going to be a success story. And I had a recent one I mentioned. We did a dinner because the practice was here in the Metroplex. So I was local and able to join the new surgeon and the owner founder surgeon as well as their staff. We all went to dinner, and it's going swimmingly. The personalities meshed. The staff loves the new surgeon. The new surgeon is bringing new ideas and energy. I talked, sat next to the practice director who's, been managing the practice for 30 years. And she said, Steve, I'm energized. Like, he's brought energy. To your point, she said we transitioned a couple of staff members that probably needed to go in terms of not ready to kind of take on this new phase. And that's helped energize the staff. He's had some buy-in on bringing in a couple of new people, and he's doing great. We're employing what you mentioned and counsel your clients to do, which is how do we handle he can see you more soon and, more quickly and so forth. And he had like 4 consults his first day, so it's working. So I would just say it can work. It does work. It takes a village, and it doesn't happen overnight. But if you're committed to the process, it can work, and we do see it happen.
Oh, so glad to hear that, because
Yeah, it's rewarding.
right? Because there's so many older surgeons that I work with that need this advice because they've got to figure out how to exit, but please do it now. Don't wait. So Steve,
Yes.
if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, which I'm sure they will. I know your website. Can you tell us how, your website and how they'd want to reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach me through the website, that will be listed. It's www.paradigmsurgegroup.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And for anybody who's going to be at the ASPS meeting in San Diego next month, come see us. We'll be in booth 247. But if you have questions about it, or you're considering it, or just want some advice, please reach out and we'll be happy to help.
I will be there as well. So please, audience, if you're going to be there, let's meet up there. Just let me know. Okay. Thanks so much, Steve. It has been a pleasure. That's going to wrap it up for us here. But if you want to get in touch, you can reach out to me on my website. Actually, I also offer a complimentary consultation. So you can reach out and leave me a message at my website, which is katherinemaley.com. Or you can certainly DM me at Catherine Maley MBA. And also, I meant to tell you, all of my podcasts are also video casts, and they're on YouTube. So if you're dying to watch us talk, it's just my YouTube channel, and it's Catherine Maley. I hope you got a lot out of this, everyone, and we'll talk again soon.
The fastest way to success is to model other successful surgeons who have what you want. But you can only see their results, not the path they took to get there. So you continue to jump from one thing to another, hoping to find something that will work for you too. But it rarely does. So try this shortcut instead. It's guaranteed to move you forward. I compiled my intellectual property to grow cosmetic revenues, everything I've gleaned over the years, into one playbook of the most successful practices and what they do to win. Go to cosmeticpracticevault.com and let's grow your cosmetic revenues.